I'm very happy to welcome you to CONVOCO 2015. This year, our topic of debate is power and its paradoxes, who's really in charge of a globalized world. This is a very topical debate, as the discussion about Germany's role in the EU means. So we will look at a number of questions, like who's really in charge in the globalized world? What does it mean to be effective today? How do we make an impact? We will look at the intersections of politics, economics, and expertise, discuss expert opinions, advice, and of course, influence. Because those who give advice also want to shape the world. The myth of the neutral advisor and his or her counterpart, the rational decision maker, is an illusion. Ultimately, it boils down to a question of power. Power means the ability to subject others to your will. Power is a means to control the actions of others. The aim is to have control over the impact of action, but power does not exist in a vacuum. It coexists with powerlessness. Power and powerlessness are seeming to be opposites only. They belong together like two sides of a coin. They depend on each other. The power to make decisions and the powerlessness that cannot make decisions are mutually dependent. There is a dialectic between the two. Let me explain. No one can make decisions without accessing the world, because a decision is taken after having considered alternative options. Without examining the options for action and seeing what options are available, we cannot make a decision. The famous acronym TINA, there is no alternative, does not provide a basis for making a decision. Making a good and true decision is conditioned by the availability of choices. In order to assess the options for decision making, we often need advice. For more often than not, the complexity of developments in our state, economy, and society require experts who lay the groundwork for decisions. Most decisions require relevant expertise. It is getting more and more difficult to take a decision self-sufficiently these days. The tendency towards a commercialization of all the basic conditions of living accentuates this trend too. At the same time, the tide of information the individual feels exposed to presents a challenge to anyone in a position of power. Thus, more than ever, decision makers rely on third parties. Taking advice has the decision maker depend on the views of others on the world. Even the absolutist ruler relies on reports and information and is thus dependent on his advisors. A person who writes a report for someone else in a position of power, who delivers a lecture or provides information, is always sharing power. This produces an antechamber of power, which consists of indirect influence and power. In an extreme case, the person in power becomes the puppet of his or her advisors. We might say that powerlessness is the most powerful form of power. Your position of power depends on the access you get to the person in power, because your opinion needs to be heard. There are lots of examples in history. Cardinal Richelieu, Louis XIII, in particular Cardinal Mazarin, and Louis XIV. Two advisors usurped the power, they decided on behalf of the boy king via the access to their mothers. In their roles as educators and counselors, they themselves became powerful. For Machiavelli, too, the problem of political counseling lay in the problem of access, because he was banned from Florence, and a Republican he was as well, and yet he became a loyal servant to the Medici. Today, scientific experts offer political advice in many cases, apart from the body of knowledge that expertise makes available. Political advice should enable the competent formulation of policy. Peter Sloterdijk, the philosopher, defines an expert as someone who draws attention to a problem. To put it in a somewhat exaggerated way, we might also say that experts do not produce the truth, rather, they produce problems. The judge, for example, must not base his decision on expert opinions, because we know that there is always at least one equally valid alternative for each and every expertise. Today, expertise lies only in the effort of finding and identifying problems. We can make an impact through the ability to direct interest towards problems. We might call this leadership through problematization. This means directing our attention by identifying issues. In politics, we call it the setting of the agenda by leading the way in the attempt to identify topics, by owning concepts, by demonstrating competence in problematization. The opinion of others as well as public opinion are influenced, because those who set the agenda create the topics of interest. This is an expression of power. Thus, expertise is powerful in its powerlessness, and the dialectic of power and powerlessness cannot be transcended. Now, what keeps power and powerlessness in balance? The law, on the one hand, legitimizes power, and on the other hand, it limits it. A democratic legal system is a system of freedom, of the freedom of the people. It is the guarantee of our coexistence. The task of legal studies is thus to justify an acceptable and enforceable system. For the law, like religion and jurisprudence, is the ultimate justification of a society, in the sense that law offers orientation as well as the last secure foundation to which the individual can refer. Now, we might say that every society is as good as its legal system. Now, here I would like to digress for a moment to show how important a stable legal system is. Let me give you an example. A study carried out by Jörg Rocholl has shown that in countries with high rates of corruption, there exists a closer dependence between economics and politics in terms of the persons involved. In such cases, former politicians are more frequently found on the board of directors of businesses. This fact alone has an impact on the company value. A strong legal system is lacking. Corruption undermines the law and consequently the way society works. Power is no longer curbed. The more firmly the law is anchored in a society, the more reliably a society can function. The law guarantees a civilized way of living together in freedom. Thus, it is important to remember the definition of the we, of the collective. This is a society of common values, a society of constitutional and legal patriots. as we learned right here from Wolfgang Schön in 2012. We should love our laws in a form that we observe and appreciate them, because in the end it is law that restricts the power of the individual and equally the power of businesses and of governments, and protects us from the abuse of power.
Just as good morals, if they are to be maintained, have need of the laws, so the laws, if they are to be observed, have the need of good morals.
Thank you very much.